when her dad passed away,
George.
her dad was George Carlin, still is.
Still is.
Yeah,
Just he's just not here
he's
anymore.
not here, but he's still your dad.
Pretty much, yeah.
So I didn't. I got to be friendly with him, which was one of the great things of becoming a comedian that ever happened to me.
Sure.
And we would talk sometimes on the phone, and he was really, really nice and caring, and he always had advice. He talked to me like a comedian, not like some kid who thinks he's a comedian, you know? And he would ask me about my sets and what worked, what didn't work, that kind of thing. And he always would encourage me to call him more. And I wouldn't because I would be afraid,
Wow.
you know? But he'd always say, call me more. You have my number, you know? And I say, yeah, I will. And then I'd wait like 2 months, you know, because
Sure.
I'm like, oh, he'll get sick of me if I call him too much. But then on occasion, he called me. And he said, well, I haven't heard from you in a while. I said,
Amazing.
so, and people said that was unusual about him. That from what they'd heard, that he would call me.
I would say that's unusual about him because my dad and I never talked that much.
So, well, I'm sure you talked more than I did. But
You know what's funny is I hear these stories. My dad was the laissez-faire kind of dad. He never really gave me advice unless I would directly ask him. And we never talked about creative process at all. His process, or if I was curious about the process, I was terrified to talk to him about it, or just it never even really came up. And when I would call my dad, there was always this feeling on the phone of him being like, I'm interrupting his writing.
okay.
So it's just very strange for me when I started hearing these stories of him talking to comics. I had no idea he was talking to comics.
Yeah.
And so it's taken me about 15 years. It's been 16 years since he died. It's taken me about 15 years to really process this. That was a separate dad. That was George the comic talking to young comics.
But he was only talking about comedy with
Yes,
me.
exactly. And George the dad didn't know how to do that with me. Every once in a while there'd be like an email with an encouraging something in it or whatever, you know, or he'd pass on something. But yeah, it warms my heart so much that I'm so happy that he got to have those relationships
As
with
far
you
as
guys.
I know, from my entire generation of comedians, it was just me and Liz Mealy that he talked to. And Liz and I were friends.
That is true.
We didn't know for a while that we were both talking to George. Like, I didn't know she was. She didn't know I was. Then we made that connection, and we're like, what? You too? Me too? You know?
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
Two comedians that I know well who went on the road with your dad, Dennis Blair,
Yes.
and Steve Schaefer.
Yes.
And I mean, they always talked about the great conversations they had with him.
Yeah.
Your father was not a fan of flying, I think.
He just hated the routine of it and having to be
So they would drive a lot to the
sit around a lot of assholes.
Right. So I think it was Schaefer that said they used to play a game when they were driving. Maybe it was Dennis. Come up with the most horrible ways that a human being could die. they would talk about this in a car. Just
Yeah,
That's great.
That would be with Jerry too, my dad's manager. That sounds like a good conversation they'd
Yeah.
be having in the car for sure. I love that.
as a comedian myself and Danny, whatever his process was, and I'm sure it's just writing, all the time. I mean, it would have been great to find that out, but that's what it was.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I was at, he was at the MGM or one of those places, and he had a parking spot right in front of.
Yes, he
the
did.
thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
The one, his car was there.
Yep.
So it wasn't a big car. It was.
It was his BMW
BMW.
850 black.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I knew he was there, and the doorman said he only comes down to start it up, to make
Make sure the battery's still good.
Yeah, that's the way it was done in the older days.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
had to start it so the battery didn't die on you.
Yep.
The newer cars, you don't really have to do it as much.
Yep.
And they said that's the only time we would see him. He would come down and he'd start the car and sit in it for 5 minutes and go back up and write
He's
some
such a
more.
loner, man.
Yeah.
He was such a loner. Yeah, I think what I wanted from him, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this stuff lately because I'm kind of writing a little bit about it, but I just, that part of the process where you need to rough draft something and just try it out. And comics certainly write it down, but then you have to try it on stage as a comic, right? You just cannot try it to your mirror in front of you.
Or to your friends.
Or to your right, or to your
Right.
friends, or someone just another human needs to hear it. You need to hear the rhythm and the and all of that. but also that kind of arc in an artist's life where it's like you're not quite sure who you are yet, and then
Yeah.
you start to figure out the craft a little bit more, and you start to then trust your voice a little bit. There's just this
Right.
real process about it, and I think because I really dove into my creative process after my dad was gone, and I've been so privileged to have so many beautiful people around me have these conversations with me now. Provenza being probably one of the main ones, him and Rick Overton.
Sure.
But yeah, I think I just, I wish I had had more gumption to talk to my dad about that part, and to get him to open up about his journey around that even.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, because your dad was who he was, none of us talked to our fathers about stuff.
Oh, that's true.
You know what I mean? It wasn't like,
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for normalizing me. It really does help me.
but it's true. I
Yeah.
mean, you didn't do anything that
Yeah.
everyone else didn't do.
It's true. And my dad didn't even have a father, so he had really no idea how to father. I mean, he was a great father in many ways, but he didn't have a father, so he didn't know also.
Right.
And he really
Two moms.
he just had one mom. He
Right,
had
right,
had
right.
Mary and his aunt. His aunt Aggie lived with them too. So in some ways, two moms. But yeah, but yeah, you're right. We don't. I think we all regret not having certain conversations with our parents.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a book, I wrote a memoir, and I didn't have a lot to write about my parents because we didn't really sit and chat it out.
Yeah.
I'd come home, do your homework. Here's dinner. Go to sleep.
Yeah.
I mean, it was in the weekends we take a drive in the car. The other thing you had to face, or you have to, my parents weren't famous,
Right.
so I didn't have to get maybe you don't have to get over a hurdle because your dad was who he was.
A huge hurdle.
Yeah, and I hate that should affect you because you are who you are. Your talent is yours. You
Yeah.
have to own that, and it has nothing to do with anyone else.
Yeah, and I think always being in any room that he was in, being completely invisible in that room affects your young psyche.
Sure.
And then also the other thing affects it is that whether I mention it or someone else mentions it and someone figures out who he is when he's not in the room, that changes the
Right.
energy. And it's just a natural human thing. I mean, but I've been so obsessed with my identity my whole life because of this.
Sure.
Yeah.